He walked into the boutique with one goal: to see his daughter smile on her prom night. A smile he hadn't seen enough of since the world had shrunk to just the two of them. He had just enough cash in his pocket to rent a simple dress. Maybe not the kind dreams were made of, but the kind that could hold a memory. What he didn't know was that the woman quietly arranging silks in the corner wasn't just another employee. She owned every sequin, every thread, every dream hanging on the racks, and she was about to change his life. Not with a price tag, but with a choice. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The afternoon light slanted through the tall glass windows of Elysian gowns, painting dusty gold stripes across the polished hardwood floors. It was the kind of light that made everything look expensive and unattainable. Leo clutched the door handle for a beat longer than necessary, his knuckles white against the cool brass. He could feel the faint tremor in his hand, the one that always showed up when he was out of his element. His element was sawdust, the scent of freshly cut pine, the solid weight of a hammer in his hand. Not this. This was a world of silk and lace and whispered price tags that could pay his rent for 3 months. He glanced at his daughter Mia standing beside him. Her reflection wavered in the glass like a mirage. She was 17 with her mother's eyes, and a quiet strength that broke his heart daily. She wore her favorite faded denim jacket over a simple cotton dress, her hair pulled back in a neat braid. She wasn't looking at the gowns inside. Not yet. She was looking at him. Her expression, a careful mixture of hope and caution, a look that said, "It's okay if we can't, Dad," which only made him more determined to try. "Ready?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that felt too rough for a place like this. She nodded, a small, nervous smile touching her lips. Leo pushed the door open. The air that greeted them was different, cool, and scented with something faint and floral. Like a garden locked behind glass, the silence was the first thing he noticed. It was a heavy, weighted silence, broken only by the soft rustle of fabric. As a saleswoman glided past them, she was tall, impossibly thin, and wore a black dress. That looked simple, but Leo knew simple like that cost more than his truck. She gave them a once-over, her eyes lingering on his work, boots still faintly dusted with sawdust. Then flicking to Mia's worn sneakers, her smile was a thin line drawn in red lipstick. "Can I help you?" she asked. But it wasn't a question. It was a challenge. Leo felt his shoulders tense. He instinctively put a hand on Mia's back, guiding her forward. "We're looking for a prom dress," he said, his voice steady. Despite the knot tightening in his gut, the saleswoman's smile didn't waver. "Of course. Do you have an appointment?" Leo hadn't considered that. "No, we require appointments for fittings, especially during prom season." She cut in, her tone sweet but sharp as glass. "It ensures our clients receive the attention they deserve." The word clients hung in the air like a judgment. Leo knew they didn't look like her usual clientele. He wore a clean but faded flannel shirt, his best one, and jeans. His hands were calloused, the hands of a man who built things, not bought them. He knew what she saw, a man who had wandered into the wrong world. Mia's hand found his, her fingers wrapping around his wrist, a silent signal that it was okay, that they could leave. But Leo couldn't move. Not yet. He'd promised her this one night, this one chance to feel like a princess. A normal teenager, not the girl who had to grow up too fast. Not the girl whose father worked 16-hour days just to keep the lights on. "We just wanted to look," he said quietly. "My daughter, she just..." He trailed off, not knowing how to explain the weight of this moment without sounding desperate. The saleswoman's gaze softened into something that looked like pity, and that was worse. "The gowns here are couture originals," she said slowly, as if speaking to a child. "Our price points begin in the 4-figure range. Perhaps a department store would be more suitable for your budget." The words were a slap, a quiet dismissal that echoed in the silent room. Mia's grip on his wrist tightened. Her face had fallen, her eyes fixed on the floor. Leo's jaw clenched. He felt a hot flush of anger and shame creep up his neck. He was about to turn to leave to pull Mia out of this cold, polished place, and never look back, when a voice cut through the tension, calm and low, like the hum of a cello. "I can help them." Every head turned. A woman emerged from behind a rack of deep blue gowns. She was unassuming at first glance, dressed in simple black trousers and a soft gray sweater. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, a few stray strands, framing a face that was striking, but not in a way that demanded the attention. She looked like an artist or a writer, not a sales associate. She walked toward them, her movements unhurried, and her plate eyes, which were a deep, warm brown, were fixed on Mia, not with pity, but with genuine interest. The saleswoman stiffened. "Elena, I have this handled. Do you?" Elena asked, her voice, still quiet, but carrying an authority that made the other woman fall silent. She stopped in front of Mia and smiled a real smile that reached her eyes. "Hi, I'm Elena. What's your name?" "Mia," she whispered, her gaze still on the floor. "It's a beautiful name," Elena said softly, "and I think I have the perfect dress for a girl named Mia. It's a sample piece, one of a kind. It's not on the floor, but I have a feeling it was waiting for you." Leo stared at her, his defenses still up, not trusting this sudden turn of kindness. He knew what a sample piece meant. In places like this, it was a polite way to offer a discount, a gentle way to manage the unmanageable. But the way Elena looked at Mia, the way she completely ignored the saleswoman's disdain, made him hesitate. Elena led them toward the back of the store, past racks of shimmering fabrics and mannequins draped in impossible creations. She didn't talk about prices, she talked about colors, about how a certain shade of blue would bring out the color in Mia's eyes. She treated them not as customers with a budget, but as guests in her home. The fitting room was a small private alcove with a plush velvet chair and a three-way mirror that seemed to multiply the soft light. Elena handed Mia a gown, a whisper of pale silver fabric that shimmered like moonlight on water. "Just try it," she said gently. "No pressure." Leo sat in the velvet chair, feeling a decade older than he was. This was a world he could never give his daughter, a world of effortless beauty and unspoken wealth, a world where a dress wasn't just a dress but a statement. He was a carpenter. He built solid things that lasted, things with purpose and function. But he couldn't build this fleeting moment of magic when Mia stepped out of the fitting room. The air left his lungs. The dress fit her, as if it had been spun from one of her own dreams. The silver fabric clung to her frame in all the right places, falling to the floor in a soft pool around her feet. The delicate beaded straps caught the light, making her skin glow. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and shining, and for the first time in a long time, he saw the little girl he'd been so afraid of losing, swallowed up by a young woman of breathtaking grace. "Dad?" she asked, her voice a hush. Leo couldn't speak. He just nodded, a lump forming in his throat. She looked beautiful, not because of the dress, but because in it she looked happy. She looked free. The saleswoman had vanished, replaced by the quiet hum of the store and the soft rustle of silk as Elena adjusted a nearly invisible strap on Mia's shoulder. Leo watched her hands move with a practiced, confident grace that didn't fit the profile of a simple shop assistant. He'd seen hands like that before, on architects, on designers, people who understood form and structure, not just sales quotas. She stepped back, her eyes appraising Mia with a professional but warm gaze. "It's perfect." Elena murmured more to herself than to them. Then she turned to Leo, her expression unreadable. "What do you think?" Leo finally found his voice, swallowed past the tightness in his chest. "She's perfect," he corrected softly, his gaze never leaving his daughter's face. Mia did a slow turn in front of the mirror, her fingers tracing the delicate beadwork on the bodice. "I feel," she started, then stopped, unsure how to finish. The sentence, "like yourself?" Elena offered. Mia looked at her in the reflection and nodded. "Yeah, but a shinier version." Elena's laugh was quiet and warm, a sound that seemed to belong in a sunlit studio, Not this hushed cathedral of fashion. Leo stood up his hands, finding their way into his pockets, a nervous habit he'd never managed to break. "How much?" he asked the question, hanging in the air like a storm cloud. He was bracing himself for a number that would make him physically flinch. A number that would mean more than just an empty bank account. It would mean another month of instant noodles and watered-down coffee. Elena didn't look at him right away. She was still focused on the dress, smoothing a small wrinkle in the fabric with her thumb. "This one's a bit of an anomaly," she said. Her tone casual, but her eyes held a flicker of something else. Something he couldn't quite name. It was a prototype. The designer wasn't happy with the beading on the left strap, see? She pointed to a small section where the pattern was almost imperceptibly different. "We were instructed to clear it from inventory. It's been in the back for months. Honestly, I'd forgotten it was here." Leo's brow furrowed. "So what does that mean?" "It means," Elena said, finally turning to meet his gaze, "that its official price is $1. Leo stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the polite smile that would reveal the joke, but it never came. She was serious. $1? He repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "For this?" "Plus tax," Elena said with a faint smile. "Company policy." The first saleswoman reappeared at the edge of the alcove, her face a mask of disbelief. "Elena, you can't." "I can." Elena interrupted, her voice losing none of its softness, but gaining a steel edge that silenced the other woman instantly. "I'm the floor manager today. My decision is final." Leo's mind was racing. A floor manager, a prototype, a single dollar. It all felt too easy, too convenient. It felt like a lie, a kind one, but a lie. Nonetheless, he looked at Mia. Her face was a canvas of pure, unadulterated joy. She was twirling slowly, her reflection dancing in the mirrors, a silver ghost of happiness. He couldn't take that away from her. He couldn't question this miracle in front of her. Not now. He pulled out his wallet, his hand still shaking slightly, and opened it to the small section of bills. He'd so carefully counted that morning. He took out a single crisp dollar bill and held it out to Elena. Their fingers brushed as she took it. The contact was brief, but it sent a strange jolt through him, like a spark from a live wire. She was warm, her skin soft, a stark contrast to his own calloused hand. He felt a sudden dizzying awareness of her, of the faint scent of her perfume, of the way the light caught in her dark hair. She took the dollar and folded it neatly, her movements precise and deliberate. "I'll have it boxed for you," she said, her eyes holding his for a second, too long. In that moment, Leo felt like she was seeing more than just a grateful father. She was seeing the years of struggle, the sleepless nights, the quiet pride he clung to like a life raft. And she wasn't judging it, she was honoring it. He didn't know who this woman was, or why she'd just handed his daughter a dream for the price of a gumball. But as he watched Mia hug the dress box to her chest on the way out of the store, he knew he would never forget her. The drive home was different. The old sedan didn't feel as tired. The engine didn't seem to cough as much. Or maybe Leo just wasn't listening for it anymore. He was listening to Mia. She sat in the passenger seat, the large white box resting on her lap like a sacred artifact. She hadn't stopped talking since they left the store. Her voice was light and bubbly, filled with plans for the prom, what shoes she might find at the thrift store, how she would do her hair, who she might dance with. She was alive with a kind of teenage energy he hadn't seen in her for months, maybe years. "Can you believe it, Dad?" she asked for the 10th time, her eyes shining in the rearview mirror. $1. Leo managed to smile. "It was your lucky day, kiddo." But he knew it wasn't luck. It was Elena. He couldn't get her out of his head. The way she'd moved with such quiet authority, the way she'd invented that story about the flawed beating so seamlessly, the way her eyes had held his when he'd handed her that dollar. It was a kindness so profound. It felt suspicious. His world was one of transactions of cause and effect. You work, you get paid. You build something solid. It stands. People didn't just give things away, especially not things of value, not without a reason, and he couldn't for the life of him figure out hers when they got back to their small apartment above the laundromat. Mia immediately took the dress to her room to hang it up. Leo could hear her humming through the thin walls. He sank onto the worn couch, the springs groaning in protest, and ran a hand over his face. He should have felt relieved, happy, but instead he felt a deep, unsettling sense of debt. He hadn't paid for the dress, not really, and that debt sat heavy in his chest, like an uncashed check. He had no way to repay. He thought about her name, Elena. He'd said it to himself a few times. It felt solid like her gaze. He wondered what her story was. What made a woman with such poise work in a dress shop and give away merchandise for pocket change? He had a feeling the answer wasn't as simple as a flawed strap. He looked around their small living room at the second-hand furniture he'd painstakingly repaired, at the framed photo of his late wife on the mantelpiece. Her smile still so vivid, it hurt, at the stack of bills on the small table by the door. Their two worlds couldn't have been more different. She belonged to silk and chandeliers. He belonged to sawdust and overdue notices. And yet, for a few minutes, in that store, she had crossed the divide and met him where he was. He closed his eyes, trying to push her from his thoughts. But it was no use. She was there, a quiet mystery wrapped in a gray sweater. And he had a feeling that this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The week leading up to prom was a blur of nervous energy and quiet anticipation. Mia was a different person. She floated through their small apartment, a constant low-level hum of excitement radiating from her. She practiced her makeup at the kitchen table. Using cheap drugstore palettes she'd bought with her babysitting money, she tried out different hairstyles in the cracked bathroom mirror, sending photos to her friends for their opinions. She even danced by herself in the living room to music. Only she could hear her socked feet sliding across the worn linoleum. Leo watched it all from the sidelines, a quiet observer in his daughter's sudden bloom. He'd come home from the workshop each evening, covered in a fine layer of sawdust, smelling of pine and varnish, and he'd find her there in the middle of their cramped life, shining. He hadn't realized how much of her light had been dimmed by their circumstances until now. It was back, fierce and bright, and it was all because of a dress. And a stranger named Elena. He found himself thinking about her at odd moments, while sanding a tabletop, while measuring a cut, while driving to the lumberyard. Her face would flash in his mind, her calm voice, the feel of her fingers brushing his. It was a dangerous line of thought. He knew that he had no business thinking about a woman like her. He was a widower, a father, a man whose life was a series of carefully managed repairs, both on wood and on their fragile finances. He didn't have room for mysteries, or for women who seemed to step out of a different reality. But still, he wondered one afternoon while he was delivering a custom-built bookshelf to a client to a wealthier part of town. He drove past Elysian gowns. He slowed the truck, his eyes scanning the elegant storefront. He saw the saleswoman, the one with the red lipstick, arranging a mannequin in the window, but he didn't see Elena. He felt a pang of disappointment that was so sharp it surprised him. He told himself it was just curiosity. He just wanted to understand the gesture that had changed so much for Mia. But as he drove away, he knew it was more than that. He was a man who understood foundations, who knew that you couldn't build something lasting on an unstable base. And his brief encounter with Elena felt like he'd stepped onto ground that was beautiful but utterly unknowable. And a part of him, a part he hadn't acknowledged in years, wanted to know what was underneath. The day of the prom arrived on a wave of warm spring air, the kind that smelled of damp earth and blooming jasmine. The world outside seemed to be celebrating with them. Leo had taken the afternoon off, a rare luxury he couldn't really afford, but one he wouldn't miss for anything. He stood in the doorway of Mia's room, watching her get ready, her friends chattering around her in a whirlwind of hairspray and nervous laughter. The silver dress hung on the back of her door, a shimmering promise waiting to be fulfilled. He felt a familiar ache in his chest, a bittersweet mix of pride and loss. She was growing up so fast, leaving behind the little girl who used to fall asleep in his arms, and becoming this radiant young woman who was about to step into the world on her own. He retreated to the kitchen. Needing a moment to himself, he was making a clumsy attempt at tying his own tie, the one he only wore for weddings and funerals. When a knock came at the door, he wasn't expecting anyone. He opened it to find a delivery man holding a long, slender box tied with a white ribbon. "For Mia." "The man," said Leo, frowned and signed for the package. Taking the box inside, it was from a high-end floral shop downtown one. He knew Mia couldn't afford. He called her into the living room. Her hair was now swept up in an elegant twist, a few loose curls framing her face. She looked at the box, her eyes wide. "Who's it from?" Leo shrugged. "I have no idea." She opened it carefully. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue paper, was a perfect corsage, a single white orchid with tiny silver beads that matched her dress, exactly tucked into the ribbon. Was a Praeton side of like 1W. Small card with a single line of elegant script. "Every queen needs a crown, even a small one. E." Mia looked up at Leo, her face alight with wonder. "E? Elena?" Leo stared at the card, his heart giving a hard thud. It was her she hadn't forgotten them. She was still out there, a quiet benefactor watching from a distance. A part of him was unsettled by the gesture, the feeling of being observed of. Being a recipient of a charity he couldn't repay. But another part felt a warmth spread through his chest, a gratitude so deep it was almost painful. "Looks like you have a guardian angel, kiddo," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yeah," Mia whispered, touching the delicate petals of the orchid. "I guess I do." Later, as he watched her walk out the door with her friends, a shimmering vision in silver, he couldn't shake the feeling that Elena's kindness wasn't just a random act, it was a thread, and he was standing at one end, not knowing where the other end led the week. After prom, the silver dress hung in a protective bag on the back of Mia's door, a silent testament to a Broden to a dash night of magic. The apartment had settled back into its usual rhythm, the quiet hum of the laundromat below, the scent of coffee and sawdust, the gentle weight of their routine. But something had shifted. Leo felt it. Every time he looked at Mia, she carried herself differently. Now, with a little more confidence, a little less of the weary caution she'd worn for so long. The memory of that night had fortified her, and Leo was endlessly grateful for it. But his own mind was far from settled. Elena was a ghost in his thoughts, a question mark hanging over his life. He'd found himself driving past the boutique a few more times on the way to and from. Jobs always slowing down, always searching for a glimpse of her, but he never saw her. It was as if she had been a mirage, a figment of their need. On that one particular day, he was in his workshop, a small rented space in a dusty industrial park on the edge of town. The air was thick with the smell of cedar and wood glue. He was planing a piece of oak, his movements rhythmic and focused, when the sound of an unfamiliar engine made him pause, a sleek, black sedan utterly out of place. In this neighborhood of work trucks and rusted vans had parked just outside his bay door, a woman stepped out. She was tall, dressed in a sharply tailored pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She walked toward him with the brisk, no-nonsense air of someone who billed by the minute. Leo wiped his hands on a rag and stepped forward, his guard immediately up. "Can I help you?" he asked. The woman's eyes scanned the workshop, taking in the stacks of lumber, the scattered tools, the half-finished projects. "You're Leo?" she asked, her voice clipped and professional. "I am." She handed him a business card. It was thick, heavy cardstock with a simple embossed logo, an elegant intertwining E and A. "My name is Sarah. I'm Miss Ashford's executive assistant." Leo stared at the card. "Ashford? Elena Ashford?" The woman clarified as if he should have known. "She'd like to commission a piece from you." Leo's mind reeled. Elena Ashford. He turned the name over. In his mind, it sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. A dough bride. Commission? He repeated. What kind of piece? A custom desk for her home office. She admired your work and insists on having it done by you personally. She's provided the specifications here. Sarah handed him a thick envelope and a retainer. She handed him a second envelope, a check. Leo didn't take it. I don't understand, he said, shaking his head. Why me? Sarah's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Miss Ashford believes in investing in true artisans, she says. Your work has integrity, a quality she finds increasingly rare. Leo looked from the woman to the fancy car to the envelope in his hand. It felt like a test or a trick, a way for her to repay a debt he hadn't asked her to incur. He didn't want her money. He didn't want to be her project. I'm not for hire like this, he said, his voice tight with pride. Ashford anticipated you might say that. Sarah replied, her tone even. She's not hiring you. She's investing in your craft because she believes it's worth more than you're charging. She also said to tell you that this has nothing to do with the dress, and everything to do with the man who raised the girl who wore it. Leo was silent. His head spinning, the name Elena Ashford echoed in his brain. He took the envelope with the specifications, his fingers brushing the thick paper. He still didn't understand her motives, but he was a craftsman, and a challenge. It was a challenge. He'd build the desk, but he wouldn't cash the check. Not yet. He needed to see her face to face to understand who this mysterious benefactor truly was. After Sarah left, the workshop felt too quiet. The scent of cedar and sawdust suddenly felt provincial. The solid, predictable world Leo had built for himself felt like it was tilting on its axis. Elena Ashford. The name gnawed at him. He knew he'd heard it before, but he couldn't connect it to the woman in the gray sweater, the one with the kind eyes and the easy lie. He went home that night, the thick envelope with the desk specifications sitting on the passenger seat of his truck, like a silent accusation. Mia was at the kitchen table, studying her face, lit by the glow of her laptop. She looked up when he came in. Tough day? She asked, noticing the tension in his shoulders. You could say that, he said, sinking into a chair and tossing his keys on the counter. He told her about the visit from the executive assistant, about the commission for a custom desk. About the name Elena Ashford. Mia's eyes widened. She immediately typed the name into her search engine. The results loaded in seconds, and she turned the laptop toward him. Leo leaned forward, and his breath caught in his throat. There she was, on the screen. Dozens of images of her, one at a glamorous charity gala in a stunning emerald gown, another on the cover of a business magazine with the headline, The Ashford Empire. How one woman rebuilt a fashion legacy. There were articles about her company, Ashford Holdings, a global conglomerate that owned dozens of luxury brands, including a boutique chain called Elysian Gowns. She wasn't a floor manager. She was the CEO. The owner, the quiet queen of a world he couldn't even fathom. Leo leaned back in his chair, a slow, cold dread seeping into his bones. It wasn't just a kind gesture, it was a game to her, a way for a bored billionaire to play fairy godmother. For an afternoon he felt like a fool, a pawn in a story she was writing for her own amusement. The kindness that had warmed him now felt like a calculated act of condescension. Dad, Mia said softly, her voice pulling him from his dark thoughts. Maybe it's not like that. Maybe she's just a nice person who happens to be rich. Leo shook his head, his pride a raw wound. Nice people. Don't lie, Mia. They don't hide who they are, and they don't send their assistants to hand out charity disguised as a job. He stood up and walked to the window, staring down at the streetlights below. I'm not building that desk, he said, his voice low and hard. I'm going to return her check and tell her we don't need her help. He had to draw a line. He had to protect what little dignity they had left. He wouldn't be her pet project. He wouldn't be a footnote in the life of Elena Ashford. The next day, Leo drove to the address Sarah had given him for Ashford Holdings. It was a sleek glass tower that pierced the city skyline, a monument to a world he didn't belong in. He walked into the lobby, his work boots, silent on the marble floor, and felt the familiar weight of being out of place. The air was cool and sterile, and everyone who passed him wore a perfectly tailored suit, and in everyone who passed him, expression of detached importance, he gave his name to the receptionist and was told to wait. He sat on a leather couch that probably cost more than his truck and held the 2 envelopes in his lap. His hands were steady, his resolve firm. They was here to end this, to sever the thread that had so unexpectedly woven itself into their lives. After a few minutes, Sarah appeared and led him to an elevator that whisked them upwards in unnerving silence. They stopped at the top floor, the dyed penthouse office. The doors opened to a sprawling space, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. The furniture was minimalist and elegant, and the only art on the walls was a single large abstract, painting in shades of blue and gray, and there, at a massive desk made of dark polished wood, stood Elena. She was dressed in a simple but exquisitely cut navy blue dress. Her hair was down, and she wasn't smiling. She looked up when he entered, and her expression was a mixture of apprehension and resolve. "Leo," she said, her voice quiet. "Thank you for coming." He didn't respond. He walked across the vast office and placed the 2 envelopes on her desk. "I can't accept this," he said, his tone even but firm. "We don't need your charity." Elena didn't look at the envelopes. She looked at him, her brown eyes holding his. "It's not charity." "What is it then?" he challenged. "A game? A way to see how the other half lives? You lied to me, Elena. You pretended to be someone you're not." "I didn't lie about who I am," she said, stepping around the desk to face him. "I only lied about what I do, and I did it because I wanted one moment, one single interaction that wasn't about my name or my money. I wanted to see if someone could see me, just me, and you did." Leo's resolve wavered for a second. She seemed so sincere, so vulnerable, standing there in the middle of her empire, but he couldn't let his guard down. "You should have told me," he said, his voice softer now. "You should have trusted me with the truth." "You're right," she admitted. "I was a coward, but I was also just tired. Leo, tired of the performance, tired of being a brand. I saw you and Mia in the store, and you were so real, your love for her. It was so honest. It was something I hadn't seen in a long time, and I just wanted to be near it." Her words chipped away at his anger, leaving behind the raw ache of confusion and something else, something he was afraid to name. He looked around the opulent office at the city, sprawling beneath them. "This is your world, Elena," he said, gesturing to the view. "My world is a 2-room apartment and a workshop that smells like sawdust they don't mix. Maybe they don't have to," she said, stepping closer. "Maybe they can just coexist. Maybe a man who builds beautiful things with his hands and a woman who's forgotten how to feel anything real can find some common ground." She was so close. Now he could see the faint flicker of fear in her eyes, the same fear he felt in his own chest. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, "but it's not a game, and it's not charity. It's just me asking you not to walk away." Leo stood frozen, caught between his pride and the undeniable pull he felt toward her. He didn't know if he could trust her, but as he looked into her eyes, he saw a loneliness that mirrored his own, and for the first time, he considered the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she was telling the truth. The silence. Elena's office stretched on, thick and heavy with unspoken words. Leo's gaze drifted from her face to the city beyond the glass, a sprawling, glittering tapestry of lives that felt 1,000,000 miles from his own. He was a man who dealt intangibles in the solid, predictable nature of wood and steel. This world of hers of abstract power and invisible wealth felt like smoke. He couldn't grasp it. He couldn't trust it. "I build things that last," he said finally, his voice low and rough. "Things with a foundation. I don't know what this is built on, Elena. You're an idea, a headline, not a person. I can." He trailed off, searching for the right word. Understand. Her expression softened, a sad smile touching her lips. I know that's why I wanted you to build the desk, because I knew you'd have to come here to talk to me about it. I knew you wouldn't just take the money. It was a calculated risk. A long shot, I'll admit. That small confession of strategy of a plan, it pricked at his pride again, so it was a setup. It was an invitation, she corrected gently. An invitation to see that this, she gestured to the office, the view, isn't all of me. It's just the part the world knows. I spend my days in boardrooms talking about profit margins and brand synergy, and I go home to an apartment that's as quiet and empty as this office. I've forgotten what it feels like to have sawdust on my clothes, or to have someone make me a cup of coffee just because they want to, not because it's in their job description. Her vulnerability was disarming. It was a side of her. He hadn't expected the powerful CEO of Ashford Holdings admitting to a loneliness so profound it echoed his own. He looked at the desk she'd been standing behind. It was a marvel of engineering, sleek and modern but cold, utterly devoid of character. You hate that desk, don't you? He asked suddenly the question. Surprising even himself, she blinked. Then a genuine laugh escaped her. A sound that was so out of place in the sterile office that it felt like a rebellion. I despise it, she admitted. It was chosen by a designer who said it projected an image of uncompromising strength. I think it just projects that I have no soul. For the first time since he'd walked in, Leo felt a genuine smile tug at his own lips. It does. I want a desk that feels like it was made by human hands, she said, her voice earnest. I want something with flaws, with character, with a story. I want something you would build. He looked from her to the envelopes, still sitting on the cold, polished surface of the desk he despised. He still didn't trust the world she came from, but he was starting to trust the woman standing in front of him. He picked up the envelope with the specifications and tucked it into his jacket pocket. He left the check on the desk. I'll build your desk, he said, but I'm sending you a proper invoice when I'm done, and you'll pay what I charge, not a penny more. Elena nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Deal. And one more thing, he said, pausing at the door. Next time you want to talk, just call. Don't send your assistant. I will, she promised. As he walked out of the office and back into the elevator, he felt the tectonic plates of his own world shifting. He was terrified, but for the first time, in a very long time, he also felt a flicker of something he'd thought was long-dead hope. Leo spent the next 3 weeks immersed in his work. The workshop became his sanctuary, a place where he could pour his confusion, his apprehension, and his burgeoning hope into the grain of wood under his hands. 2 was building more than a desk. He was building a bridge, a tangible connection to Elena's world. But on his own terms, he chose the wood himself, a warm, richly grained walnut that felt alive to the touch. He designed the desk to be both elegant and functional, with clean lines but with subtle handcrafted details, a hand-carved inlay along the edge, a set of drawers that slid open with a satisfying whisper-smooth precision. It was the best work he had ever done. Every point, cut, every joint, every layer of finish was infused with a piece of himself, his integrity, his craft, his story. During that time, Elena kept her promise. She called him not every day, but often enough to let him know she was there. Her calls were never about the desk. She asked about Mia, about his day, about the small details of his life that no one had bothered to ask about in years. She told him about her own days, about the mind-numbing board meetings, the absurd demands of the fashion world, the crushing loneliness of her position. They talked like two people from different planets, slowly learning each other's language. One night she called him from a charity gala. In Paris he could hear the faint sound of an orchestra and clinking glasses in the background. I'm surrounded by 1,000 people, she'd said, her voice a low murmur, and I've never felt more alone. What are you wearing? he'd asked, trying to picture her. She laughed softly. A dress that costs more than your truck and feels like a cage. I'd rather be in your workshop, she'd whispered, with the smell of sawdust and you. Those conversations became a lifeline for both of them. A small private world. They were building over the phone piece by piece. Mia noticed the change in him. He smiled more. His shoulders weren't as tight. The weary exhaustion in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet light. One evening, she found him in the workshop late at night, just standing in front of the nearly finished desk, his hand resting on the smooth surface. "It's beautiful, Dad," she said softly. "Yeah," he breathed. "It is. It's for her, isn't it?" she asked. He nodded. Mia came and stood beside him. "You like her, don't you?" "It's complicated, kiddo." "No, it's not," Mia said with the simple wisdom of a 17-year-old. "You're both lonely, and you make each other less lonely. It's not that complicated at all." Leo looked at his daughter, then at the desk, and realized she was right. It was the world around them that was complicated. What was growing between them was terrifyingly simple. The day Leo delivered the desk, he felt the same nervous tremor he'd felt walking into her boutique. He and a friend from a neighboring workshop carefully carried it up in the service elevator of her apartment building, a sleek residential tower that overlooked the park. Her apartment was just like her office, vast, minimalist, and impeccably decorated, but there were small signs of her true self. A stack of well-worn novels on a side table, a collection of old black-and-white photographs on a shelf, a soft-worn throw blanket draped over a starkly modern couch. Elena was there to meet them, dressed in simple jeans and a cashmere sweater. She looked nervous, her hands clasped in front of her as they maneuvered the desk into her home office. They set it in place, and Leo stepped back to look at it in the space. It was perfect. The warm walnut wood was a stark contrast to the cold glass and steel of the room. It was an anchor of warmth and authenticity in a sea of sterile luxury. "Leo," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. It's a desk," he said, cutting her off before she could say more, trying to downplay the significance of it, because if he acknowledged what it really was, a peace offering, a confession, a piece of his soul, he wasn't sure what he would do. "It's more than a desk," she said quietly, stepping forward and running her hand over the smooth surface. "It's the first thing in this entire apartment that feels like me." She turned to him, her eyes shining. "Thank you. I'll send you the invoice," he said, his voice rough. He needed to keep the lines clear to maintain the safety of the transaction, but the way she was looking at him was making that impossible. She nodded. "I know." After his friend left, they stood in the office, in an awkward silence, the desk between them like a beautiful, well-crafted border. "Will you stay?" she asked finally. "For a cup of coffee? The real kind, not the stuff from my fancy machine. I have a French press I've never used." Leo hesitated. Every instinct told him to run to get back to his own world, where the ground was solid and the rules were clear. But he was tired of running. He nodded. "I'd like that." They sat in her kitchen, a small, sleek space that looked like it had never been used, and drank coffee from simple white mugs. It was quiet and comfortable, and for the first time, Leo didn't feel like he was in a billionaire's apartment. He felt like he was in Elena's home, and he realized with a jolt that the two were very different things. The coffee was strong and hot, and it warmed the parts of Leo that had been cold for too long. They sat at a small table in a sun-drenched corner of her kitchen. The city, a silent, glittering backdrop. Far below Elena, had her knees drawn up to her chest, her bare feet tucked under her on the quarter chair. She looked younger here, more relaxed, stripped of the armor of her corporate life. "So," he said, after a long, comfortable silence, "what's the story with the fancy watch?" The question was out before he could stop it. A remnant of the suspicion he was trying to shed, she glanced down at her wrist, at the slim, elegant timepiece. "This?" she said. This was a gift from my father on my 20th birthday. He said it was a reminder that time is the only currency that truly matters. She ran her thumb over the watch face. Ironic, isn't it? I've spent the last decade letting other people own my time. Why do you still wear it? He asked gently. She shrugged. Because it's the last thing he gave me before he got sick, before the company became more important than his family. It's a reminder of who he used to be, and maybe who I used to be. 2. The confession hung in the air between them, a fragile offering of trust. He didn't press for more. He just nodded, understanding the weight of objects that carry memories. He thought of the worn photograph of his wife on his mantelpiece. The one thing he would save in a fire. What about you? She asked, her voice soft. Your ring. You don't wear one, but there's an indentation on your finger. He looked down at his hand, at the pale band of skin where his wedding ring had been for 15 years. It's been 3 years since she passed, he said, his voice quiet. I took the ring off a year ago. It felt like a betrayal at first, like I was erasing her, but it got too heavy to wear. Did you love her a lot? Elena asked, her tone full of a gentle empathy that made it easy to answer. She was my foundation. He said simply. When she died, the whole house felt like it was going to collapse. I've just been trying to keep the walls from caving in ever since for Mia. They fell silent again. But this time, the silence was different. It was filled with the ghosts of their pasts, with shared grief and a mutual understanding of loss. Elena reached across the table, and her hand covered his. Her touch was light, but it was an anchor in the storm of his memories. You're not just keeping the walls from caving in, Leo, she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. You've built a home, a real one, with so much love in it. Mia is a testament to that. He didn't pull his hand away. He just turned it over and laced his fingers with hers. Their two worlds, with all their differences and disparities, met in that simple touch, a carpenter's calloused hand and a billionaire's soft one, both searching for the same thing, a foundation to build on again. The next few weeks were a tentative dance, a slow exploration of the fragile bridge they had built between their two worlds. Elena started visiting the workshop. She'd show up unannounced, dressed in jeans and a simple t-shirt, her hair tied back. In a messy bun, she'd bring coffee, real coffee, in a thermos, and they'd sit on upturned buckets of sawdust and talk for hours. She never offered advice on his business or tried to use her connections to help him. She just listened. She learned the names of his tools, the different types of wood, the stories behind the pieces he was building. She loved the smell of the place. She said it smelled like something real was being made. Leo, in turn, started to step into her world. But on his own terms, he met her for lunch, not at fancy restaurants, but at a small diner near her office, where no one knew her name. He walked with her through the park on a sunny afternoon, watching as she shed the weight of her corporate persona with every step she took with him. She laughed more, a real uninhibited laugh that made her eyes sparkle. He discovered she had a surprisingly goofy sense of humor and a competitive streak when it came to a game of tic-tac-toe scratched into the dirt with a stick. Mia adored her. She saw Elena not as a billionaire or a benefactor, but as a friend. She'd text her photos of her outfits asking for advice, and Elena would respond instantly with encouraging words. She became a fixture in their small apartment on Friday nights, bringing pizza and watching old movies with them, curled up on the worn couch. One evening, while Mia was in her room, Elena helped Leo fix a leaky faucet in the personed kitchen. They were crammed into the small space under the sink, their shoulders brushing, bumping into each other. As they worked, he was showing her how to wrap plumber's tape around a pipe when he looked up and found her watching him. Her expression soft and open. What? He asked, his voice a low murmur. Nothing, she whispered. It's just I've never seen someone so patient with something so broken. He didn't say anything. He just leaned in and kissed her. It was a slow, gentle kiss, tentative at first, then deepening. As the weeks of unspoken longing and quiet connection finally found their voice, it wasn't a fairy tale kiss. It was a real kiss, messy, and a little awkward with the faint taste of coffee and the smell of sawdust, and for both of them, it felt like coming home. The news broke. On a Tuesday morning, Leo was in the workshop sanding the edge of a new cabinet when his phone buzzed with a text from Mia. "Turn on the news," it said, followed by a string of worried emojis. He wiped his hands and pulled up a news app on his phone. The headline hit him like a physical blow. Fashion mogul Elena Ashford's secret blue-collar romance. From boardrooms to workshops, there was a grainy photo of them taken from a distance walking in the park last week. Elena was laughing, her head thrown back, and Leo was looking at her with an expression of such open affection that it made his stomach clench. It was a private moment stolen and twisted into a public spectacle. The article was a masterpiece of condescending speculation. It painted him as a rugged carpenter, a charity project for the ponderate, lonely billionaire. It hinted that their relationship was a PR stunt, a way for Elena to seem more relatable to the masses. It mentioned Mia, calling her the plucky daughter who had been the catalyst for their unlikely meeting. Leo felt a hot wave of fury and humiliation wash over him. This was exactly what he had feared, that her world would swallow them whole and spit them out as a caricature. He threw his phone across the workshop. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor. The screen spiderwebbed with cracks. He didn't care. He paced the cracks. Small space, like a caged animal. His hands clenched into fists. He had let his guard down. He had started to believe that they could build something real, and now the world had ripped it apart and put it on display for public consumption. He knew what would come next. The reporters, the cameras, the whispers, the pitying looks. He had worked his whole life to maintain his dignity, his independence, and now he was a tabloid headline, a blue-collar boyfriend, a story for people to consume with their morning coffee. His phone started ringing. He saw Elena's name on the cracked screen. He silenced it and then turned it off. He couldn't talk to her, not now. He needed to put up his walls again to protect himself, to protect Mia. He had been a fool to think their two worlds could coexist. They couldn't. One always consumed the other. And he was on the side that got eaten alive. The aftermath was worse than Leo could have imagined. The next morning, two news vans were parked outside his workshop. A reporter with a microphone and a relentless smile tried to corner him as he got out of his truck. "Mr. Hale, can you comment on your relationship with Miss Ashford?" Leo pushed past him without a word and slammed the workshop door shut. He could see them through the window. Cameras pointed at his door like weapons. They were outside their apartment building, too. Mia had to be escorted to school by a prostrate friend's parent to avoid them. The story was everywhere. A modern-day fairy tale spun for public amusement. The narrative was always the same: the powerful billionaire and the simple, humble carpenter. It stripped him of his identity, his craft, his pride. He was no longer Leo Hale, artisan and father. He was Elena Ashford's pet project. He stopped answering his phone. He stopped checking his emails. He locked himself in his workshop and tried to lose himself in his work. But the noise of the outside world was too loud. It seeped through the walls, through the cracks in the door. Elena tried to reach him. She called, she texted, she even showed up at the workshop one evening, but he wouldn't open the door. Stood inside his heart, pounding his back, pressed against the wood, listening as she pleaded with him to talk to her. "Leo, please don't let them do this to us." Her voice was muffled, but he could hear the pain in it. "What we have is real. Don't let them take it away." But he was too afraid, too raw. He couldn't face her. He couldn't face the world that came with her. He had to protect what was left of his own small world, his own sanity. After a week of the relentless siege, Leo made a decision. He couldn't live like this. He couldn't subject Mia to it. He told her they were leaving for a while, going up to a small cabin in the mountains that a friend owned a place, with no cell service and no neighbors. "Just for a bit, kiddo," he'd said, "until this all blows over." Mia had looked at him, her eyes full of a wisdom that was far too old for her years. "You're running away, Dad," she'd said quietly. "And you're leaving her behind." "I'm protecting us," he'd insisted. But as he packed their bags, he couldn't shake the feeling that Mia was right. He wasn't just running from the reporters, he was running from Elena. He was running from the terrifying possibility that he loved her. And he didn't know how to love someone and keep his own world intact. The mountain cabin was a refuge, a quiet pocket of the world where the only sounds were the wind in the pines and the crackle of the fire in the stone. Hearth, the air was clean and sharp, and for the first few days Leo felt the tight knot in his chest begin to loosen. He and Mia took long hikes through the woods. They fished in a crystal-clear lake. They played cards by the fire at night. They didn't talk about what they had left behind. They didn't mention Elena's name. It was an unspoken agreement, a fragile truce with the life that was waiting for them back in the city, but the silence was a loud one. Leo found himself staring into the fire for hours, his mind replaying every moment with Elena. Her laugh, her touch, the look in her eyes when he'd kissed her. He had run away to protect his world, but now that world felt small and empty without her. In it one evening as they were cleaning up after dinner, Mia broke the silence. "I miss her," she said quietly, not looking at him. She was washing dishes, her back to him, but he could see the tension in her small shoulders. Leo stopped drying the plate in his hand. "I know, kiddo." "She was good for you, Dad," Mia said, turning to face him. Her eyes were clear and steady. "You were happy when she was around you?" Smiled more. "You didn't look so tired all the time." "It was complicated," he said, falling back on his old excuse. "No, it wasn't," she insisted, stepping closer. "You were just scared. You're always so scared of losing things that you don't let yourself have them." Her words were a punch to the gut, a truth so sharp it stole his breath. He had spent the last 3 years living in fear. Fear of not being enough for Mia, fear of failing, fear of letting someone else in only to lose them again. He had built his walls so high to keep the pain out that he had inadvertently locked out the joy as well. Mia's eyes softened. "Mom wouldn't have wanted you to be alone forever, Dad. She would have wanted you to be happy." A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "I want you to be happy." Leo pulled his daughter into a hug, his own eyes burning. He held her tight, smelling the faint scent of pine in her hair. He had been so focused on protecting her that he hadn't realized she was strong enough to handle the storm he was. The one who was fragile. He was the one who was afraid. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch of the cabin, staring up at the vast, star-dusted sky. He thought about Elena in her glass tower, surrounded by people but utterly alone. He thought about the choice he had made to run away, to choose safety over love. He had been wrong. He had let fear win. He had to go back. He had to fight for her. For them, for the real complicated, beautiful thing they had started to build. He would not let the world break them. Elena stood on the balcony of her penthouse apartment, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. She held a glass of wine. She hadn't touched her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. She had been in a fog for the past 2 weeks since Leo had disappeared. The reporters had eventually moved on to the next scandal, but the silence he'd left behind was a constant ache. She had tried everything to reach him, but his phone was off and his workshop was shuttered. She had even driven to his apartment, only to be told by a neighbor that he and Mia had gone away. No one knew where her company. Her empire felt like a gilded cage. She had never felt more powerful and more powerless. At the same time, she had all the resources in the world, but she couldn't fix the one thing that mattered. She was about to turn and go inside when her phone rang. It was an unknown number she almost ignored. But something made her answer. "Hello?" she said, her voice tentative. "It's me." Leo's voice was a low rumble on the other end of the line, rough and hesitant. But it was him. Elena's hand flew to her mouth, her knees feeling weak. "Leo, where are you?" "I'm on my way back," he said. I was a coward. I ran away. I was scared. I know," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Elena, for everything, for what they wrote, for how I reacted. It's not your fault." She said, "It's my world. It's the price I've always had to pay." "I don't care about the price anymore," he said, his voice stronger now, more certain. "I care about you. I'm not going to let them win. I'm not going to let them define us. Where are you?" she asked again, her heart pounding with a hope she hadn't dared to feel. "Look down," he said. She frowned and walked to the edge of her balcony, peering down at the street below. And there, parked in front of her building, was his old work truck. Its headlights were on, shining up at her like a beacon. He was standing. Beside it, his silhouette, small but solid in the glow of the city lights. He was looking up at her, a silent promise in his stance. Elena laughed through her tears, a sound of pure joy and relief. "Stay right there," she said. "I'm coming down." She didn't bother with the elevator. She ran down the 20 flights of stairs, her heart pounding in time with her footsteps. She burst out of the lobby doors and ran into his arms. He caught her, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around. He buried his face in her hair, smelling the faint scent of her perfume mixed with the cool night air. "I love you," he whispered, the words he'd been too afraid to say. "I love you too," she cried, holding him tight, as if she'd never let him go. They stood there in the middle of the city street, a carpenter and a billionaire wrapped in each other's arms, oblivious to the world around them. They were no longer two separate worlds. They were one foundation, strong and real and ready to withstand any storm. The press conference was Elena's idea, a move so bold it left her entire board of directors speechless. She didn't want to hide anymore. He didn't want to let tabloid narratives define their story. She stood at a podium in a room packed with reporters. Cameras flashing like a summer storm. Leo stood just off to the side, a few feet behind her. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing his best flannel shirt, clean jeans, and his work boots. His presence was quiet but unwavering, a silent statement of support. Elena looked directly into the cameras, her expression calm and composed. "For the past few weeks," she began, her voice steady, "there has been a great deal of speculation about my private life. Stories have been written. Narratives have been spun. Most of them filled with condescending assumptions and outright fictions. Today, I want to set the record straight." A hush fell over the room. "Yes, I am in a relationship with Leo." "Hale," she said, her gaze flicking to him for a brief second, a soft smile touching her lips. "And no, he is not my pet project. He is not a charity case, and he is not a temporary diversion for a lonely billionaire. He is the most honest and integrous man I have ever met. He is a master craftsman, a devoted father, and the person who reminded me what it means to be real." She paused, letting her words sink in. "My world is one of excess and image. His is one of substance and authenticity. Some have suggested that these two worlds cannot coexist. They are wrong. This isn't a story about a billionaire and a carpenter. It's a story about two people who found each other and are building something real. Something that is not defined by bank accounts or social status, but by mutual respect and love. We will not be hiding. We will not be apologizing for who we are. And we would appreciate it if the world would grant us the privacy to build our life in peace." She didn't take any questions. She simply took Leo's hand, and they walked out of the room together, leaving behind a stunned silence and a new headline, one they had written themselves. The wedding was small and private, held in the backyard of a modest house Elena had bought on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't a mansion. It was a home, a place with a big oak tree and room for a garden, a place where Mia could have her friends over, and where Leo could build a new workshop in the back. It was a perfect blend of their two worlds. Mia was the maid of honor in a simple blue dress that matched her eyes. She stood beside Elena, her face beaming with pride. Leo stood at the makeshift altar, a wooden arch. He had built himself, his eyes fixed on Elena. As she walked toward him, she wasn't wearing a couture gown. She was wearing a simple white dress that she'd bought off the rack. She looked more beautiful to him than she ever had in any magazine. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises of love, support, and a lifetime of facing the world together as a team, as they were pronounced husband and wife. Mia tossed a handful of wildflower petals into the air, and their small group of friends and family erupted in cheers later that evening. As the sun set behind the trees, they sat on the porch of their new home, watching the fireflies begin to glow in the trees. Twilight. Mia was inside, with her friends, their laughter spilling out through the open door. Elena leaned her head on Leo's shoulder, her hand resting in his. "Are you happy?" she asked softly. He turned and kissed her gently. "I've never been happier." He looked out at the yard, at the workshop he was about to build, at the life stretching out before them, a life he had never dared to dream of. "You know," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I still have that $1 bill." Elena smiled. "I know. It's the best dollar I ever spent." He said, "It bought me a whole new world." "No," she corrected him softly. "It just bought you a dress. All the rest of this you built it yourself." And as he held her close, he knew she was right. They had built this together, a foundation of love so strong that no storm could ever shake it.